Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On today's workshop, we are coming together to learn about creating dynamic pages in Vue.js. This is Hussam from Microsoft Reactor, and I lead the Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors, as you know, are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry-leading ideas and technology from Microsoft partners and the open source community. It's also the home to the Microsoft for Startups program. With a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events, there's something for everyone. So yeah, keep an eye on our calendars on meetup.com to not miss on any of the interesting events and topics that you are willing and keen to learn more about. On today's workshops, as you know, we have regular Wednesday workshops where we discuss some of the fundamentals and key concepts. And in today's workshop, we're covering the dynamic pages in Vue.js. So one of the goals of any web framework is to dynamically update the data values. And in this workshop, we will be exploring more on how you can make your pages dynamic based on these values. So we will be covering lots of fundamentals and key concepts, and we're joined by Alan Sanders, who is a senior cloud architect with over 25 years of experience in software engineering, architecture, and design. And he's been delivering technology strategy and business solutions in multiple verticals, as he is always keen to emphasize. He's passionate about learning in both on his own and for others. He's also a Microsoft certified professional, and he has lots of experience to share with us. We're excited to have you here with us, Alan, and to take us and to take all the members through this journey. A quick highlight, as I mentioned before, we started recording the session, so it will be available on YouTube. So don't stress if you miss any part or you have anything that you want to come back to and review. It's going to be posted on our YouTube channel shortly. And there is a link to check in. So this is where you can find all the links and resources for today's workshop. So make sure that you spend a minute to check in and use the event ID 13804 on the check-in page. I'm going to post the link again in the meeting chat. During the session and workshop today, you are highly encouraged to share all your questions during the session. Alan always keeps an eye on the chat and will continuously try to address your points. But also, if you would like to maybe come off mute towards the end and ask the question, you can mention that in the chat and I will enable that feature for you. Quick reminder here, the code of conduct, we're all coming from different backgrounds and we're here to learn. So let's be aware of others, friendly and patient, welcoming and respectful, and open to all questions and viewpoints. We need to be understanding of differences and kind and considerate to others at all time. That's pretty much all for the introduction. I would like to pass over the mic to Alan to take us through this workshop.
Thank you very much, Hussam. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. So as Hussam mentioned, today we're going to be walking through creating dynamic pages in Vue. If you joined us last week, we began talking about the fundamentals of Vue and kind of what is Vue, what does it look like? How do we integrate it? And then we, this week you're going to move a little bit further along that journey to look at some of the capabilities we have available within the framework to make our pages dynamic. And why are dynamic pages important? Well, because it gives the user a much more responsive experience, right? It's almost as though they have an application installed locally on their machines when in fact it is running in the browser, but it's so fluid and responsive and reactive that it feels very, very performant, and it just really improves and increases the user's experience. So we're going to be looking at that today. As Hussam said, definitely open for questions. Please leverage the chat window, and I've got two screens going, so I'll be able to keep an eye on that as we proceed. So let's go ahead and we talked about, Hussam did a great job sort of telling us what reactors are. There's multiple opportunities for us to meet, and our code of conduct, which is very, very important, right? So in terms of Vue, depending on where you are in your journey, let's just talk a little bit about what Vue is, right? Vue is what's known as a progressive JavaScript-based framework. It focuses on the Vue, layer of our application, the VIEW, right, layer of our application, and it provides us with the ability to, again, do data binding, do conditional rendering. We can do rendering of lists. That's what we're going to be talking about today, among other things. And it's progressive in that you can either just add a script tag to your HTML page that will pull Vue into your application for use. That's one option, right? And then progressively, you can get more, interesting and sophisticated in how far you integrate Vue into your app. You can download the framework locally using npm. And then there's also a command line interface, or CLI, that a session next week will be talking about, right, to sort of round out our discussion on Vue specifically. But in terms of JavaScript frameworks, it is JavaScript based, and what we're going to see is kind of the standard approach is one option anyway is add that script tag to your page, create a Vue app in JavaScript, mount that Vue app to some element of your page, and then you have access to data binding, either handlebars, which gives you just sort of display, or the vbind syntax for binding attributes of an HTML element, like the source of an image, for example. So that's kind of what we talked about last week. We're going to be building upon that this week as we proceed. So let's go ahead. Agenda-wise, we have quite a bit to get through. So let's see. Is it possibility to have access to the fundamental webinar too? It is available out on MS Learn, Microsoft Learn. So we'll talk about that as we start looking at this week's modules. That module is available, and the session is recorded and should be available on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. So certainly, go back, take a look at that fundamental introductory webinar, and then kind of move, and then kind of move into this week. We're going to be covering that today, but certainly, if you're like me, kind of reviewing the same thing a couple of times can really, really be helpful. And Hussam posted the YouTube link, the channel to the link to the YouTube channel. So thank you very much for that. So agenda-wise, we're going to be talking introduction, and then, as I said, we have quite a few things we're going to sort of touch on in terms of options for making our pages dynamic. We're going to be talking rendering lists. We're going to be talking conditional rendering, right? Determining based on data in our model whether or not we want to show something. We're going to talk about working with forms, and specifically two-way binding, right? Where we can bind data, display it, and then allow the user to make a change, for example, in a in a text box, and then have that modification made by the user persisted into the back end model, right? Into the state of that page, so we can use the updated data to either persist it to a database, call a service, or do some calculation or processing with it. We're going to be talking about working with events, and we can adding handlers to buttons, right? HTML buttons. When someone clicks that button, if we want to execute something in response to that click, we can do that in JavaScript, right? But there's a way we can do it in Vue that gives those handlers access to our registered model data. And so we're going to look at that. And then we're going to round it out with a discussion about computed properties. So we have someone saying, sorry, this is my first time joining. You were mentioning about topics covered in previous sessions. Did I miss much? No, we just covered off on some fundamentals. I'm going to reinforce some of those fundamentals today in today's session. And then as we get into the Microsoft Learn modules for this session, I'll be able to point you to the modules that were available for any of the previous sessions as well. So you'll be fine. You should be fine kind of following along with what we're doing, because we'll take an opportunity to reinforce some of what we talked about previously, but continue to build on that here. All right, let's go ahead. And so speaking of which, these couple of links right here, which will be available in the resources. If you check in, you'll have access to those resources. One of the resources that is provided in that check-in area is a link to my GitHub repository where my slides are posted so that you can have those after the fact as well. But let's go ahead. I'm going to launch this module, and I'm going to increase the size so we can actually see it. And then I'm going to launch this module as well. So we're going to be walking through a couple of different modules today. Okay, so I've created something with Vue, but just almost 2 years ago. That's great. That's awesome. If you've already started to leverage Vue, I think you're going to find, or I hope you find this particular session interesting and informative in terms of how you can sort of continue to build on that knowledge and on that experience. So very cool that you've actually already built something. We're going to go ahead and really continue to kind of drill into some of those fundamental areas and foundational areas that make it possible for us to, evolve our applications, if you will, right? Okay, so this Microsoft, so you'll notice here at the top, this take your first steps with Vue.js. If I click that, you'll see here's the get started with Vue. This is what we talked about last week. And then we've got a couple of sessions that we're talking about this week. We've got a session we'll be talking about next week. So if you missed last week, you certainly can go back and work your way through this one as well. Leverage the YouTube recording for last week, this week, and definitely take advantage of just reinforcing or continuing to reinforce that information. Okay, Microsoft Learn is great, in my opinion. I think it does a great job of combining, documentation, links, information that you can read with a specific set of exercises that help you reinforce. You're definitely welcome to follow along today with me as we go. I'm going to be moving at a pretty good clip, but obviously I don't want anyone to feel like they're getting left behind. So ask questions as we proceed, but we're really going to start to kind of drill into this. Obviously, we're going to be using this as our framework, but we're not going to be obviously walking through this line by line. I've taken the information, distilled it into a PowerPoint presentation that we can walk through, but then we're going to be doing a lot of coding together today as well. Okay. So let me get back over to my presentation here. So what are our objectives? We're going to be talking the mechanics of building dynamic pages in Vue. And it's one of the benefits of Vue. If you have any experience with the technology like AngularJS or Knockout or React, right? There's a lot of similar concepts there, although those are, can be a little bit heavier. Vue allows us to do dynamic pages in a pretty, with a pretty low barrier of entry in terms of execution and implementation. We're going to talk dynamic lists. We're going to talk conditional rendering, and then forms, events, and computed properties, as we mentioned. Prerequisite-wise, really what we're looking for is experience with HTML and CSS, JavaScript, because we're going to be using JavaScript. And then if you have previous experience or exposure to Vue.js, that can be helpful also. But as I said, I'm going to walk through and kind of reiterate some of the concepts we covered last week. Software-wise, we're going to use Git. because we're going to pull down a couple of repositories that act as good starting points for us. We're going to use Visual Studio Code, and then obviously we're going to be using Vue.js. All right, so let's talk rendering lists. Pardon me. So if I have a collection of things, I have 4 names or 4 products, right? And I want to be able to create an unordered list. So obviously I could create manually, right? I could statically create 4 LI elements, right? List item elements, 1 for each of those product names. That would work, right? And I'd see the list displayed when I rendered the page in the browser. If, however, that list changes, we add an item to the list, we remove one, or we change one that exists already in the list, I'd have to go back and, modify that static HTML to reflect the updates. Vue allows us to take a collection, right, an array that sits within our data model and holds a set of values. And with one command, we can associate a directive to an element to instruct Vue to create one of each of those elements for an item in our collection. And so we get a dynamic build out of that list. Furthermore, if that list changes in our data model, right, if that collection changes, our list display in Vue will automatically update to reflect it. That's the dynamic part that we're talking about, right? The way we do that with Vue is with the v-for directive. And we can use that to basically dynamically display a collection. Now, it doesn't have to be only list items that we're displaying. Could be other types of elements as well. But we could apply the v-for to an element and have Vue automatically render a copy of that element for each item in the collection. And as I said, it'll automatically update. This is a typo. This actually should say LI. But we've got an unordered list here, and instead of having 4 LI elements, I have 1 LI element. I've associated a v-for directive, which is Vue based. And then I'm saying in this collection called names, I want you to take each one, iterate through this collection for each element, for each name in that list of names. I want you to create a list item and put the name value in the display. And so if there are 4 names in this collection, we'll end up with 4 list items, elements. If there are 5, we'll end up with 5. It will just display automatically instead of us having to statically lay that out. With lists, especially large lists, right? If we wanted to update, if a specific item changes, like something changes about an item within that list, one option could be to totally replace the list, right? Totally, and Vue can do that. Vue can tear the entire list down and rebuild it. But if that list is large, it would be more efficient if Vue could find the specific item in the list that changed and only update that one, right? It just saves processing cycles and makes that responsiveness even that much more performant and quick. So with v-for, we have access to this key attribute that allows us to associate a unique identifier to that element, right, for Vue, that Vue can then use, right, to go back and locate it in the list for updates that are more targeted. The simplest case of this would be using like the numeric index of the collection. But if it's an object, we can do other things with it as well. So here is an example. And we're actually in the coding that we do, we're going to look at an object that does this. But here we have our list item or LI element again. We've got our v-for. We're still iterating over the names collection. But instead of only gathering the name out of that collection, we're also gathering the index of the item, right? So as Vue iterates over names, for the first name, it will give us the name value, and then the index, which will be 0 based, it'll give us a 0. We can use that index here in the key attribute, and display the name, the string name here in the contents. It'll go to the next name. That name will be populated in this variable. 1 will be populated in index. And then the key for that second list item will be 1. And the name will be whatever the string name is. And so it just builds it out, right? But the difference here is we are associating some unique identifier with that element within that v4 that Vue can then use to do some targeted updates. All right, so before we move to conditional rendering, let's go ahead and do some coding. Let's test some of this out. So if we move back over to this dynamic pages display, I'm going to move through a couple of these areas. This render list is basically going to talk about, what we just discussed. Okay. But let's go ahead and do maybe a little bit of practice with it. All right. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, the easiest way to get it is just to browse for or search for download VS Code. And if you go to download, you'll find a version that supports each platform, which is very cool. That's one of the cool things about Visual Studio Code. It's available on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. The other cool thing about it is that it has a ton of extensions, so you can add extensions to your IDE or integrated development environment within VS Code. And then, if you're working with Docker, for example, there's an extension to help you manage Docker containers in a visual manner, right? Or Kubernetes, or if there's a specific language, there are multiple extensions available. We're going to use one today that allows us to launch a page, leave that page running, and then as we make changes to the code that sits behind that page, it will automatically update the page display. So we don't have to, close the page out and reopen it to see our modifications. So what we're going to do, and I'm also using Windows subsystem for Linux. If you haven't used that, it's also known as WSL. WSL is a way for us to run a full Linux distribution natively within Windows 10. So I have Windows 10 here, obviously, right? But within Windows 10, I'm running an installation of Ubuntu. And that's just typically the way I do my development. I'll run VS Code through WSL through Ubuntu. And then I kind of, leverage it that way. So we're going to first clone this repository. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it. Actually, I'm going to navigate to the folder where I typically keep my source code. Let me do that instead. Let me paste that. And that's going to pull down, right, that repository locally. I'm then going to navigate to the cd ms learn. Do you have a link for this environment for how to install call it? Are you speaking specifically of WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux? If so, I can post some links here shortly. Okay, got it. When we get a little bit closer to the end of the course, I will post some links to some Microsoft documentation that will help walk you through how you install Windows Subsystem for Linux, certainly. All right, so I'm going to navigate to this folder, and then I'm going to navigate to the start subfolder. Now, when I'm in a folder, right, in WSL, I can simply type code dot, and that will launch VS Code. And let me make this larger. That will launch VS Code in the context of the folder where I was, right? So here I have several assets, which are just some really cool looking images, in my opinion. And what we're going to be focusing on really is this index.html and this index.js. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. With index.html, one of the things that we can do to bring Vue into our application, right? We can, one of the simplest ways to do it is just to add this script tag in the head of our page. And this is going to point us to the latest version of Vue for utilization. It's going to go out to a CDN or content delivery network, and it's going to basically bring the latest version of Vue into the context of your application, and more specifically into the context of this page. Now, if you wanted to pull it into your entire application, you could have a base page that you then add other elements to. There's a component-based structure to Vue that you could leverage. But from sort of a fundamental perspective or a foundational perspective, this is how we leverage Vue or bring Vue into the context of our page. Down here in the bottom of our body, you'll notice that we have a script reference for index.js. That's this, local JavaScript file. So let's look at what that's doing. And here we start to see Vue, right? To create a Vue app and leverage Vue in this page, all I have to do is create a Vue app using Vue.createApp. And that's going to take an object of configured values and setup for our app. One of those things is a data method. The data method will return an object of various properties that represent our data model. And then there'll be a couple of other things that we can add in here as we move along during today's session. So in this case, the data method is going to return this object, which includes product name, description, image, all of these model values. It also includes an array, right? That's what this indicates, or a collection of product classes, right? And each product class has a name, a price, a number of seats available, and then this early bird flag that's true or false. So we build this app in JavaScript. We leverage that or import it using the script tag. And then right here, we mount the app. So this app that we've created in Vue.js, this object here, we mount it. We call the mount method or function, and then give it, for example, this ID, the ID of this div. That's what this hash app does. It gives us the ID of this div. And then within this div, we can start including our Vue binding code, right? We can start leveraging Vue within that section of our HTML page. And we see a couple of examples here using handlebar syntax for display of the product name and the description. So the product name and description values here, right, will be displayed in a header and in a div. Then we can also have an image that uses the vbind syntax for dynamically configuring attributes of this element, like where the image source would be found, what alternate text we might want to display, and then any style that we want to apply to the image. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is if I hit the extensions and if I search for live server, live server is the extension that will allow us to launch the page, leave it running, and then as we make changes, have those changes automatically reflect in the browser. So I've already installed it, but if I hadn't, I could have simply installed it here. And now let's go ahead and launch this the way it is, and then we will add our dynamic list render. So the way you launch this using live server is I can do Control-Shift-P, or if I'm on a Mac, I can do Command-Shift-P to open up the command palette. I can type live server. You see that it's already at the top, but if it wasn't, I could type live server, and then it's going to show me the live server related commands I have available to me. And I'm going to use the open with live server here. And so that's going to fire up a port 5500. And that's going to display here. We see the display of our data values dynamically that are sitting behind our model, right? So the data that shows up here, and then we see, you know, the rounding or border radius. We see the image, which is going to be represented by these data model properties here, right? In the HTML, it looks like just a variable, but at runtime, Vue dynamically replaces this with this information to give us that view. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at actually, you know, processing a list or displaying a list. So I am going to, pardon me, I'm going to copy and paste this in the interest of time over to my HTML page here. And let's, but I'll walk through what we're doing here, right? Here is our v4 directive, right? This v4 directive is going to iterate over this collection. It's going to take each item of that collection, its index, and then it's going to generate a div for it. And then it'll go to the next item of the collection. In this particular case, product class, excuse me, is an object. So instead of just displaying the name like we did before, right, we are actually displaying using dot notation, product class dot name or product class dot price, right, which is represented by here and here. The other thing we can do here is we can apply additional JavaScript processing. We can leverage toLocale string to display this, you know, in according to the US, right? If we wanted a comma after the first three numbers, we could do that. This is just some formatting that we can apply. But what we're going to see is we're going to see 1, 2, 3 divs. Looks like we only have one defined, but because of the v4, we're going to see 3 different divs that dynamically reflects the properties that are defined within the objects. And so if I save this and I flip back over here, again, because of live server, it automatically updates. And here we'll see those 3 divs, right? Now, the way, you know, that this information came from this data here. So we've got coach business first. And over here we have coach business first. If I looked, inspected the HTML or the elements that sit behind there, you'd see I have 3 divs, right, for each one that have been generated dynamically using that v4. Okay. Any questions or comments, certainly feel free to post those in the chat as we proceed. But the key thing to remember there is the use of this v4 directive, referencing a collection of objects in this case. And then for each element, it's going to generate a div, and we can dynamically populate that particular element's properties in the display. Okay. All right. Let's continue. Oops. Yep, that's what I wanted to do. Let me bring my window back here so I can watch for questions. All right. So now let's talk about conditionally rendering. So what if, you know, we wanted to check a condition, and based on that condition, we would dictate whether or not we actually show an element on our page. You know, the example we'll look at later is, you know, if I'm filling out a form and I complete a booking, then I don't need to show the complete, or I don't need to show the form that allows you to do booking, right? If I've completed it, I can actually hide that and display a different message. Conditional rendering gives us a way to do that within Vue. Conditional rendering allows us to do that in Vue. So there are a couple of options for doing so. There's a way to just toggle visibility, kind of with a sort of like a true or false. And then there's a way for us to actually apply a little bit more interesting Boolean logic to make a decision, select one out of a set of available options for display. And Vue processes all of that and then renders according to the definition that you've given it. One of the ways that we do this is with the vShow directive. That's going to use either a Boolean value or a Boolean expression to determine visibility, right? So if that Boolean is true, then the element will be displayed. If it's false, then the element will be hidden. And imagine that there's logic within your application that changes that true and false variable, right? Or that changes that true and false value. And as that changes in the code, your display will automatically update to either hide or show things in response to a particular action or data value being set. The key thing about vShow is that the element is still in the DOM. It's still in the page, it just is hidden. So it's equivalent to using the CSS style display none. And we'll look at that. I see that we have a couple of Git Clone statements. I'm not sure if there's a question there or if we're just looking to provide some information, but if you have questions, definitely please let me know. Here's an example, right? We can use vShow on a div, and then we can evaluate some Boolean expression. If it evaluates to true, this div is going to show. If it evaluates to false, this div is going to be hidden. In this case, we're taking basically the current month, right? New date gives us the current date. Get month gives us the month associated with the current date. If that's less than 3, then we know it's the first quarter and we can display this div for it's the first quarter. If it's not less than 3, then we can hide this because it's not the first quarter. Additionally, within Vue, we can use the vIf, vElseIf, and vElse directives. And those give us a little bit more, as I said, options, right? We can actually leverage different, if you have familiarity or experience with another language like Python or C#, for example, you may have some familiarity with this if, else if, or if else kind of branch, right? So it's a very similar concept, but instead of applied to our logic, it's applied to our HTML. So vIf is going to use a Boolean expression, and vElseIf is as well. They're going to use Boolean values or expressions. If once it finds a branch that evaluates to true, that's the element that will be displayed, and all of the others will actually be hidden. The distinction here versus vShow, vIf and vElseIf actually removes the element from the DOM. It doesn't just hide it, it removes it. And we'll look at that when we do some coding here in just a sec. So here's an example, right? Now we have more branches, more options, right? vIf, if it's less than 3, then we'll display it is the first quarter. If that evaluates to false, then otherwise it'll check this, right? If it's less than 6, then it'll display it's the second quarter. If that's false, it evaluates the next branch. And then if all of these are false, this vElse is going to display it is the fourth quarter. And so this looks a little funky maybe, right? Like, am I going to end up with 4 divs? No, you're only, in this particular case, going to end up with 1. And the one that we use basically is determined by which of these conditions evaluates to true. If none of them evaluate to true, then we're going to end up with this sort of default case. All right. So let's look at some, or kind of continue with this example. let me come back over here. I'm going to keep moving forward. Here's what we just talked about. Now let's do some practice. Okay, so here within the VS Code, we have this more to come. What I'm going to do is grab this. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to paste it right here. And let's take a look at what it's doing. What we're doing here is we have two different buttons we might display, right? If the product class is early bird, and remember that early bird is a flag that's on the product class item. If that's true, then we're going to, so early bird is available. We're going to display this button, right? This button is going to be displayed. If it's not true, if this turns out to be false, like the third one is, we're going to display this button instead. So we will only end up with one button, and which button is determined based on the product class's early bird value. Here, if the seat's available, that's another property, right? If the seats available for that class is less than 10, then we're going to show this, almost sold out warning message. Otherwise, we're going to hide it, and we'll look in the in sort of the HTML that's rendered, or in the DOM that sits behind this, what happens, how it actually operates. So I'm going to save this. Because I'm running live server, we're going to see those updates reflected automatically. So you see here that the early bird flag was true for the first two product classes. So it says book early bird. For the third class, it was not, early bird was not available. So it just has this button instead. But Vue determined, right, conditionally, which one of these we wanted to display. You'll also notice here that almost sold out displays for the second two, but not for the first one. I mean, for the second and third one, but not for the first one. And that's, again, keyed off of whether or not the number of seats available is less than 10. So, pardon me, if we look here, I'm going to just go and do some inspect on this. Here's the button. You'll notice we only have one button, right? We don't have two buttons. We don't have one button that's shown and one button that's hidden. We only have one button in all of these cases, right? If we go here to this div, we got this button, and then this div, we have, a different button with a different text, but it's still just one button. That's because, again, VIF is going to, whichever one doesn't match, those are actually going to be removed from the DOM. They're not going to be rendered in the DOM. Versus the almost sold out message. So you'll see here, almost sold out shows the div. Almost sold out here. Here we see there's actually an almost sold out div here as well, but the display style is set to none. So that's the difference between the two, right? VShow is going to hide it, but it'll still be in the DOM. VIF is going to determine, which ones don't match and actually remove them, not render them at all. Any questions or comments? Definitely, please feel free to post those in the chat as we proceed. All right, so let's talk about forms and state. So the data that sits behind our page, in our model, that's also known as state. Now, that's just a word that we use to kind of describe that often. And often what happens is that state is maintained by users, right? If we are asking them to fill out a form to register for something, we'll present them with a set of controls. They'll enter information in those controls. That becomes the state of the page, right? That we want to leverage and utilize within the rest of our application, whether it be processing some business logic against that data and or populating that information into a database somewhere. We've seen vbind, right, or handlebars. Those give us the ability to dynamically bind or display information. but that binding is one way, right? So we can't, on the page, we can't make updates to those vbind elements and have those updates reflected in the model. I can't have those updates persisted the other direction, right? There's only one way. It comes from the model to the page with the vbind. If we want to go from the model to the page, but also enable modifications from the page back to the model, we need two-way data binding. Vue gives us that with the vModel directive. So when we use vModel with a value, it will display whatever value the model currently has. But then if the user makes changes, it will push that updated state into the model in the other direction as well. So it's a way for us to capture the user's activity within our model for additional processing. And it's available for text boxes, checkboxes, and drop-down lists. And we're going to look at each of those three here shortly. So with a text box, basically the general format is, and let me just bring this up. We'll have an input of type text, or it could be type email, could be type number, right? But here we're going to use this vModel directive that binds this text box to the name property in the model. So when this text box first displays, if name has a value, it will display in the text box. If the user changes it, that value that the user changes will be pushed back into or reflected in the name property. It will update the model with whatever the user types, because vModel is two-way. It goes from model to page and page to model. With the checkbox, it's going to look somewhat similar, right? We have this input type checkbox. We have a vModel property here that is likely a Boolean, right? Usually or often with checkboxes, we're kind of turning things on or off. So we may have a vModel directive pointing to an active property in our backend model. And so if that active is true, the checkbox will be checked. If it's false, the checkbox will be unchecked. If the user checks the checkbox, true will be populated in this property. If the user unchecks the checkbox, active will have the value false, right? That's that two-way binding, right, where it goes both ways. Now, one of the things, you might have a property that's bound that isn't actually a Boolean. It might be a string. In that particular case, we can use the vModel still for a two-way binding, but we can specify a different value for true and false. Instead of a Boolean true or false, we can instead say that when the user clicks this, right, or when it's true, right, when it's on, we're going to use the value yes. And yes is what we will be populated into this model property. If they uncheck it, then we can say false value, use the value no, populate this model property with the value of no instead. So it just gives you a way. I mean, myself, I think probably best practice would be more to stick with the true false with the checkbox, but could be that you have, requirements that need to reflect a different data value. You need a toggle, right? But instead of a simple true false, you need something else associated. These attributes, the true value and false value attributes, will enable that. And then finally, vModel with drop-down lists. With drop-down lists in HTML, they basically consist of a select element. And then within the select element, we have multiple option elements that represent the selectable things in the list, right? So what we typically do with vModel on drop-down lists in Vue is we will associate the vModel or the binding to the select element. That's the selected value. And then within each option, we'll provide a value attribute that uniquely identifies each option. As we select an option, that option's value will be populated into the model property bound to the surrounding select. And so here are a couple of examples. We have a select element, and then we have options defined within the select. The select holds the binding, right? Our V model property. This is going to represent the selected item by the user. We might have an option here that just is used to, it's disabled, you can't select it, but it's used to indicate, hey, you need to, it's a prompt for the user. Often though, what we'll do is back to our V4, right? The V4 allows us to dynamically build out a set of things, a list of things. Here we can use V4 to dynamically build out the set of options that are going to be within the dropdown. We can leverage each of the elements within this list to display the text for the user to see, and then use something like the index to uniquely represent the value of that item. When a given option is selected, whatever is in value, that will be populated into the status index model property. We can also do this here, we have a select with a V model property, but we can use for our options, we can use a set of objects, right? We can do a V4 against a set of objects. We can use one property of the current item or object, like value, to represent the value for that option. We can use a different property of that object to actually render a display. But again, whatever option the user selects, that associated value is what's going to get populated and, in a two-way binding methodology, pushed to the backend data model. So let's look at a couple of examples here. For this, we're going to need to switch over to a different, our second MS Learn unit. Let me move through these. So we talked here about model. Let's do some actual practice. So we need to clone a different repository here. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code. I'm actually going to clear this. I'm going to click down here to close my live server. I'm going to close all of these, close this folder, and shut down that instance of Visual Studio Code. I'm now going to grab this Git Clone link. I'm going to go back here to my source repos folder. And then I'm going to paste that and clone the new repository. So we had a question that came in. Hey, can you connect a web page to a cloud-hosted database REST API endpoint using Vue.js to retrieve elements to be displayed dynamically within a web page app? Absolutely, you can. Yep. So, you can, within your logic, make your call out to the REST API endpoint, populate your model within the Vue app with the data that's returned, and then you'll have the page or the HTML page bound to those model properties as they're updated from the results of the REST API call. That update will be dynamically displayed within the page. Unfortunately, we don't have time to change it, but to answer your question, the short answer is yes, you absolutely can do that. And that's a great approach, right? That's a great thought and idea of how you could leverage this to bring, a dynamic nature to your page that is even maintained, right? The configuration can be maintained elsewhere, and you can have that pulled in and pushed to the page automatically. So great idea, great thought. That's absolutely possible. Good question and comment. All right, so I'm now going to change to the MS Learn data events folder. The MS Learn module says that you're going to change directory to start, but there is no start. That's a typo, so we actually need to change to starter. And I'm going to do code dot to open up VS Code again. Here's our index.html, which kind of resets back to where we were. Here's our index.js, which has a set of, data properties here. I'm going to launch the live server. That'll bring up our page, and this is kind of our starting point. All right, so if we move back into this, we're going to create the form. So I'm going to grab this, copy it, and let me go back here. In my HTML, I'm going to paste it right here where it says add the booking form. And so you'll see our familiar vShow directive, which is going to basically key off of, let me bring this up at the same time. It's going to key, my vShow is going to key off of this booking completed property in the model. And then we're going to have a so we've got our select here, right? The model property that's going to populate and be bound in a two-way manner to that drop-down list is the cabin index. And then we're going to have a set of options that is built, using V4. We're going to build out the options from this cabins collection. And then we're going to have a text area for notes. And those notes are going to be updated here in this property. So everything's saved. So we should see that that's automatically updated our page because of live server. And you'll see here that we have, the drop down that allows us to select. And we have, this is some text. Now, it doesn't really seem like, how do we know something's happening, right? Well, obviously you wouldn't do this for real in your pages, but for our purposes, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a div, and I'm going to use handlebars syntax to reflect this value, right? And this again is only going to be one-way data binding. This isn't going to change it. This is going to display the selected value, right? Now, it's not going to be very pretty, but the point is it will give us a chance to see what's happening within Vue as this proceeds. For this one, I'm going to use booking.notes. I'm going to save that. And so now you'll notice here, and it maybe is a little hard to see, there's a 0. If I click this one, that changes to 1. If I click this one, that changes to 2. That's the two-way data binding. Here, if I say this is some text I want to enter, you'll see that reflected here. So that proves to us, right, that the information we're building is being persisted into the model state in a two-way manner. I know we're at time, but if you're okay to stick around for just a little bit, I'm going to kind of proceed to wrap things up. Hussam, if you'd like to post the survey link for folks if they have to leave, I totally understand. There's a survey that if you could fill that out, that would be awesome. That gives you an opportunity to tell us what you like to see in these events and provide your feedback. But I'm going to kind of wrap up here a couple of additional sections. If you're able to stick around, that's awesome. If not, when you have available access to the recording, you can kind of walk through that again. Thank you, Hussam. All right, so let's keep rolling here. All right, so working with events. And I'm actually going to go here, and then I'll talk about this. I'll kind of skip over those slides and just talk about this. What we're able to do is we can bind a button, the button's click event, to some JavaScript function that we want to have executed in response. Now we can do that without Vue, right? We don't have to have Vue to do that. But if we add that method, or that function rather, into the methods area of our Vue app, then we can leverage this syntax, which is either V on, or for shortcut, we can use the @ sign to associate the click event for this button to this function in our model. Why would we do that? Well, by doing that, by using a function defined within our model for the event handling, that function is able to get access to any of the model properties that are registered to that app, right? So it gives us the ability to leverage the information we have, the other information we have in the model within that event handler. To look at a quick example here. Let me continue. If I grab this methods entry for my index.js, and let me move this back over. Right here where it says add methods, I can put this here, right? We've got a book cabin function that is simply going to change the completed property to true. I can then, let me save that. What I can then do is add a button. That button is going to be using this syntax. The click event for that button is going to be bound to this book cabin function. And what's going to happen is when the user clicks this button, it's going to change this property to true. And this display shows that we only show the form if it's not been completed. And when they click that button, we'll see the form hide, right? We'll see the form disappear from view. And that's just, modifying and working with the dynamic nature of Vue. If I save this, if I go back here and I now use this one, this is my text, and I click book now, that's going to change the model property from false to true to indicate it is completed. And you see Vue is watching that, right? And Vue sees that the flag has changed from false to true, and it's going to process and basically dynamically update our Vue automatically, which can be very, very cool. All right, one last thing I'm going to touch on, and then we will be wrapping up here, is computed properties. And here is an example. So if we can add a function into the computed section of our Vue app. And what that gives us is the ability to do more than just, raw binding. What we can actually do is, add processing, add some kind of coding that allows us to format things in a nice way. But then on our HTML, we simply bind to this name just like we would any other property, and Vue executes or exercises the logic for us automatically. So let's look at a quick example of that. I'm going to add this computed section to our index.js. Right here where it says add completed values, that's supposed to say computed. This computed section has a property, it actually looks like a function called booking cabin display. And then instead of just displaying information, we can actually do some JavaScript processing here. We can get the actual cabin object that is associated to the one they selected, and then build out a formatted display for them. save that, and then if I go over here and add a spot for that information to show up. Now, this is going to show if we haven't completed booking, it's going to hide otherwise. This is going to show if we have completed booking, or it's going to hide otherwise. So we end up with a toggle, right? Imagine the form's there, you specify your selections, you say book it, that form goes away, and instead we see a display to reflect, our selections. And one of the things that we can bind to is that it just looks like another property, right? Booking cabin display. But in fact, it is this computed property that exercises or executes this logic for us. And so if I save that, go back here, I can pick this. This is my text. I'm going to book it, right? This form is going to go away. And then this is our display, our success right here. And this is that computed property that shows a combination of the name of the class and its cost. Okay. So I know we really zoomed maybe a little bit through there at the end. There's just a lot of material to get through. Definitely go back through the units again, the YouTube recording and the slides, and take an opportunity to kind of re-walk through everything and reinforce, if that helps you. I know that helps me. So we covered dynamic rendering, lists, conditional rendering. We covered two-way binding with vModel, in forms, how we manage events within Vue, and then computed properties. Here are some links. These are available after, on the check-in. So after you've done the check-in, that link is available. These links are available to you. In addition, the link to the GitHub repository is there. Yeah, thank you, Hussam. He also posted the check-in again if you want to check in there to get that information. That is everything I have. Again, the survey link has been posted. Please take the opportunity, if you would, just take a couple of minutes to fill out that survey using 13104. That's your opportunity to tell us, kind of what you like to see in these events and for you to provide your feedback. So, are there any final questions? All right. Well, it has been a true pleasure being here with you. I hope you found this informative. I hope you found this as a way to sort of continue to build out those skills and those considerations relative to Vue and how you might start to build even more interesting applications. Definitely feel free to come back to next week's session where we're going to continue our discussion of Vue and talk about the CLI or the command line interface. It's great being with you all. Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure for me. Hope you enjoyed it, and be seeing you at the next one. Thanks.